Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a muddy world where your alarm clock is a rooster and your job description literally means carry the Lord's burdens. You wake before sunrise, and the air smells like damp straw and livestock, while the mist clings to your ankles as you trudge across the frozen field. You probably won't survive this without grumbling constantly, or at least without developing a deep appreciation for modern heating. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments, it'll be fun to imagine the same sky over completely different places. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stumble over the uneven soil, plow in hand, remembering that each inch of this land is technically owned by the Lord of the Manor. Freedom. That's a funny idea here. You're a serf, bound by law and custom to serve this patch of land, to cultivate, repair, and maintain it, all in exchange for a little shelter and the right to grow your own meager crops. Historians still argue whether serfs considered themselves trapped or simply accepted this arrangement as natural, kind of like how you might accept your Wi-Fi going out during a thunderstorm and mutter, well, that's life. The manor rises ahead, a cluster of timbered buildings that smell faintly of smoke and animals. You pass other villagers also trudging toward labor, children barefoot in the mud, women carrying water, and old men who seem more stubborn than frail. You notice the dew glistening on the thatch roofs, and there's a brief, almost poetic beauty in it, before you remember that sunrise means the start of another endless day hauling hay or repairing fences. Legally, the Lord has the right to demand work from you whenever he sees fit. Today, that might mean plowing the Lord's fields, repairing a section of fence eaten by a wild boar, or collecting firewood. Quirky tales float around the village that some lords forced serfs into goose parades, where villagers had to dress birds in tiny garments and march them through the courtyard, purely for amusement. You wonder if this is a joke, or if someone actually got in trouble for missing goose practice. By mid-morning, your hands ache and your back protests. Yet there's a rhythm to the toil, planting, digging, bending, lifting, repeating. You feel connected, almost intimately, with the soil beneath your boots. It's not exactly relaxing, but there's a meditative quality. Like how people today obsessively scroll on social media to feel some control over their environment. Only here, the feed is mud, and the notifications are the Lord's shouts. As you pause to catch your breath, you glance toward the church spire, rising above the village. Even at dawn, the bells will ring soon, calling others to prayers, tithes, and moral lectures. You try to remember the last sermon. It involved a saint, a dragon, and some unspecified consequence for laziness. Quirky as it sounds, the story stayed with you, the way a bedtime story might linger, except you'll be acting it out all day tomorrow, and as the sun slowly rises, casting long shadows across the manor's courtyard. You trudge on, bound by law, tradition, and necessity, but with a tiny, stubborn sense of self tucked in your chest, like a secret jewel buried beneath the dirt. The Lord's demands hit you like a sudden splash of icy water, jarring you from the brief respite you allowed yourself. Your shoulders tense instinctively, and with a groan, you bend again to the plow, feeling the rough wood dig into your palms. Today's fields aren't just his main crops, they include a narrow strip he's been obsessively experimenting with, claiming it will yield better grain. Villagers, however, call it nothing more than the Lord's vanity project. Historians still argue whether such manorial experiments ever produced real gains or were just elaborate exhibitions of ego, but for you, the verdict is irrelevant. There is no consultation, no vote, no choice. Survival is following the plow. By mid-morning, the sun has climbed higher, burning off the lingering mist. You're hauling a heavy cart of freshly cut hay up a slippery, mud-slick slope. Each step is a battle against gravity, each breath draws dust and the faint tang of sweat into your lungs. Your muscles scream, quivering under the strain, your palms blistered and raw from gripping the ropes and wooden handles. The Lord's overseer stalks nearby like a shadow of judgment, offering instructions that feel more like reprimands, not like that, boy. Faster. Straighter. Don't squint at the sky. Your mind drifts briefly to fantasies of modern gym memberships, cushioned mats, or ergonomic equipment designed to prevent injury, but no. Luxury is a foreign word here. Every movement, every exertion, is survival, not vanity. Every drop of sweat is currency in the economy of life under the Lord. Among the steady grind of labor, oddities emerge that seem absurd even amidst toil. Tales from neighboring estates drift into your consciousness, lords requiring mandatory goose parades, with serfs dressing their birds in tiny straw hats and herding them through the courtyard for amusement. The whispered variant of the story is worse. The losing goose handler would polish the lord's boots with pond water, knee-deep in muck. You shake your head, a bitter laugh catching in your throat. Medieval humor, it seems, thrived on cruelty and whimsy in equal measure. Even amid the grind, these stories flicker through your mind like sparks, reminders that absurdity often walks hand in hand with oppression. You pause briefly to nibble a piece of stale bread, the crumbs dry and gritty on your tongue. Sweat and dirt have conspired to create a patchwork mask over your face, streaked brown and red, with clumps of mud stuck beneath your fingernails. Around you, other serfs bend, lift, and haul with the same grim determination, the sound of exertion, grunts, snapping twigs, the scrape of wood against earth, forming a rough rhythm that punctuates the day. Despite the punishing labor, there is a subtle camaraderie. The shared acknowledgement that no one has the luxury of slacking binds you together. It's an unspoken contract. You endure, they endure, and the fields are tilled. Membership in this grueling fraternity is compulsory, the benefits invisible but undeniable, the day's tasks shift constantly. One moment, you drive the plow through rich, clinging soil, the next, you repair fences torn by livestock or the jagged wheels of wagons. Your back aches, a steady thrum that pulses with each motion. Yet there is rhythm here: bend, push, lift, straighten, repeat. Your hands memorize the friction of rope, the splintery grip of wooden handles, the subtle give of packed earth beneath the plowshare. The overseer patrols relentlessly, eyes sharp, corrections never gentle. Some fringe accounts hint at clever serfs misplacing tools or subtly delaying work to regain a few moments of respite, but whether such acts occurred or are purely legend, historians debate endlessly. Still, the notion of these small, quiet rebellions offers a strange comfort. As you move across the field, fleeting moments of levity pierce the monotony. A crow lands nearby, cocking its head as if judging your efforts. A child's laugh echoes from the edge of the field, a private joke involving a pig and a stick. For an instant, the oppressive weight of labor lifts, reminding you that even in the most rigid structure of survival, the world finds ways to inject humor and unpredictability. These fleeting sparks of life offer a fragile reprieve, as if nature itself conspires to remind you of joy, however small. By late afternoon, fatigue has set deep into your bones, but the day is far from over. The Lord's demands are unrelenting, his expectations shifting only slightly from sunrise to sunset. You pause to glance at the horizon, the sky a pale wash of late afternoon light, and take a deep breath of damp earth and sun-warmed hay. Then you bend again, gripping the plow with weary hands. Your labor is the invisible engine of this manner. Without your strength, the Lord's comfort crumbles, and yet it is this very endurance that sustains the village, that keeps the soil alive and the harvest coming. The irony is sharp: the Lord's comfort depends entirely on your suffering, yet his sustenance is inseparable from your diligence. There is a strange, quiet satisfaction in this knowledge. It is grounding. It is maddening. And it is, ultimately, survival. By midday, your stomach grumbles with a sharpness that is almost rhythmic, though you've long trained yourself to ignore it until a brief, carefully timed break. The sustenance you carry is minimal, almost symbolic: a chunk of hard, dry bread, a few scraps of cheese if luck has been mildly favorable, and watery pottage that tastes more like boiled sadness than anything nourishing. You break off a piece of the bread and dunk it into the pottage, grimacing at the bland, almost chalky flavor. Each bite is a reminder, this is your primary fuel for hours of relentless labor. The difference between enduring the day or collapsing from exhaustion. Historians continue to debate whether serfs ever truly starved or simply lingered perpetually at the edge of hunger, but your stomach, grumbling and twisting, has no patience for academic argument. Its insistence is immediate, personal, and unyielding. Some villagers are slightly luckier. Perhaps a neighbor has managed a hidden garden tucked behind a rickety fence, a rebellious patch of green in the midst of the manor's strict rules. Herbs, onions, perhaps the occasional carrot pushed stubbornly through the soil, growing quietly in defiance of the Lord's regulations. You've heard whispers of these clandestine patches, how they supplement the drab rations, make the pottage slightly less grim, and occasionally keep children from whining too loudly about their meager portions. The very concept of a hidden garden feels revolutionary, an act of miniature rebellion. Yet the risk is tangible. Discovery could result in fines, extra labor, or the Lord's curious punishments, which sometimes bordered on absurd public humiliation, meted out for no reason anyone could articulate clearly. Still, for those who managed it, a secret carrot or sprig of parsley was worth the gamble. You chew slowly, noticing the subtle textures of bread soaked in thin broth, the faint tang of cheese mingling with the pottage. Your mind drifts to fringe tales you've heard from older villagers. Some serfs allegedly used foraged mushrooms, fermented berries, or even wild herbs to enrich their sparse meals. It's a medieval version of a secret snack drawer, an attempt to inject a touch of joy or flavor into survival, though with much higher stakes. One wrong mushroom or poorly fermented berry could bring sickness or punishment. The stories make you smile faintly at the ingenuity and quiet audacity of those who dared. In this world, creativity and risk are entwined with hunger, even during these brief, humble meals. Social observation is constant. Children chatter quietly, voices low but lively. Women exchange knowing nods or whispered tips about rations, tools, or foraging. Old men debate the weather and make intricate predictions about harvests, using folk knowledge that seems absurdly complex to outsiders but vital in guiding labor and survival. Within these moments, a subtle hierarchy emerges, a map of small privileges and informal influence. Who gets the best scraps? Who knows which wild plants are edible? Who can barter a single egg for a pinch of flour? Despite the Lord's vigilant oversight, this underground economy hums along invisibly, quietly maintaining balance and offering resilience against the harshness above. You swallow the last glutinous bit of pottage, scraping the remnants with your tongue before wiping your hands on your worn tunic. There is a faint residue of clay and grain, the gritty tactile memory of a meal that barely satisfies but momentarily fuels you. Returning to labor, the work feels slightly lighter with even this small nourishment. Though your back aches insistently, reminding you of every neglected stretch, every hour bent over the plow, every strain endured without pause. You glance at your fellow serfs, noting the small, private victories each celebrates quietly, a perfectly straight furrow, a fence repaired without complaint, or simply enduring another hour without collapse. Scholars argue whether these small triumphs provided genuine pride or were mere survival mechanisms, but at this moment, such distinctions are meaningless. Each success is vital, a personal bulwark against fatigue and despair. By mid-afternoon, thoughts of the next meal begin creeping into your mind, threaded with calculations of chores yet unfinished. Your stomach has become a metronome, ticking steadily, relentlessly, marking the passage of labor, signaling hunger as a constant companion. You remember once again the rumor of a secret garden and allow yourself a faint smile at the daring and ingenuity of neighbors willing to risk punishment for a hidden carrot or sprig of onion. For a brief instant, you imagine how different life might be if such a garden were yours, a personal refuge of green and nourishment. Then reality asserts itself. You shake your head and return to plowing, because fantasies do not sow seeds, and dreams will not coax the soil into growth. Yet amid this unending monotony, subtle pleasures emerge, often unnoticed by the untrained eye. The scent of freshly turned earth rises warmly from the furrows, mingling with the faint, sweet smell of crushed grass and the musky tang of livestock nearby. The soundscape is layered, birds calling from the hedgerows, the snap of twigs underfoot, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional laugh from a child who has stolen a forbidden bite of something edible. These small signs, nature, levity, tiny rebellions, create a rhythm that sustains morale. Even amid hunger, discomfort, and relentless labor, humans find ways to persist, to carve out microcosms of survival and joy that no lord can fully control. It's a lesson you feel in your muscles, your senses, your aching back. Life endures in the small, hidden moments, and survival is as much about noticing these tiny sparks as it is about performing the required work. Even in the relentless grind of labor, village life finds a way to assert itself, carving small pockets of vitality into the otherwise punishing routine. As you trudge back toward the cluster of cottages after the Lord's midday demands, you notice children darting between barns and fences, their voices shrill with laughter that slices through the heavy air. They engage in some improvised game involving sticks, stones, and a particularly stubborn pig that refuses to cooperate. It's crude, chaotic, and exhausting just to watch, the squeal of the animal, the slap of hands against mud, the tumble of small bodies across uneven ground, but there's a spark of resilience in it that makes you momentarily forget your aching back. Historians still argue whether these social interactions genuinely eased the serfs' misery or were merely fleeting distractions from the relentless toil, yet for a moment, you are drawn into their energy, carried away from the fatigue of the fields. You pass neighbors leaning over fences, voices low but lively, weaving between gossip and practical advice. Discussions range from the Lord's latest arbitrary whims to serious debates about whose crops survived the frost or whose chickens have begun laying again. There's humor here too, often dark or ironic, a running commentary on life's absurdities. One villager recounts last week's accidental goose parade, comparing whose goose performed best. And you hear a muffled laugh at the story of a goose so obstinate it toppled its handler entirely. Some fringe accounts even suggest that serfs engaged in rudimentary betting on these miniature spectacles, though whether such practices were widespread or embellished is still debated. You smirk at the idea, appreciating the small rebellions disguised as play, the way humor acts as a salve for exhausted souls. Village life also thrives in its subtle, almost invisible rituals. You catch women whispering over fences, swapping tips on preserving vegetables for the coming winter or secretly improving pottage with sprigs of wild herbs. Their hands, gnarled from years of labor, deftly demonstrate techniques for crimping cabbage leaves or layering root vegetables in earthenware pots. The men trade practical hints too, murmuring about which oxen respond best to certain harness techniques, or how to guide a stubborn plow along a rocky furrow. These mundane acts of exchange create a hidden network of knowledge, invisible to the Lord but crucial for survival. You realize that even in a rigid system, information is power, and quietly sharing it, whether it's a tip, a joke, or a small warning, is itself a subtle act of rebellion. Children are everywhere, their restless energy both exhausting and inspiring. Some start helping at the tender age of 5, carrying tiny bundles of firewood or scattering seed in carefully prepared rows. You hear whispers of clever youngsters who once outwitted an overseer, pretending to carry extra hay while secretly orchestrating a prank with a mud-caked boot. Legends like these drift from cottage to cottage, becoming part of the oral folklore you absorb while mending fences or stacking firewood. Their audacity is instructive. Survival is not just about enduring labor, but also finding small ways to reclaim autonomy and amusement within a strict system. The village square, though modest and often dusty, pulses with life. People trade small items, a scrap of cheese for a chicken feather, a handful of herbs for a chunk of bread, a stitch of cloth for an egg. You notice a rhythm in this bartering, almost like a heartbeat underlying daily existence. Even though the Lord owns the land, and laws tether every action, the village thrives quietly through these interconnections. Fringe tales claim that serfs sometimes staged clandestine games, mock courts, or improvised festivals to lampoon authority, though historians debate whether such acts were genuine resistance or merely entertainment. Regardless, the intent is clear: small acts of communal expression keep spirits alive even when formal freedoms are scarce. Within this intricate web of labor, humor, and shared knowledge, you find fleeting moments of relief. You crouch to toss pebbles at a tree stump alongside the children, laughing softly at your own clumsiness as a stone ricochets unexpectedly. They giggle in turn, delighted at the momentary reversal of roles, the adult reduced to playful imperfection. Even as exhaustion tugs insistently at your limbs, these social bonds provide reassurance: you are not entirely alone. For a few precious minutes, you are part of something larger, a community that endures because of shared work, shared stories, and shared laughter, even the muddy, ridiculous kind involving rebellious pigs or mischief with boots. By the time the sun dips lower, painting the cottages in muted amber light, the camaraderie of the village leaves a faint warmth in your chest. Your back aches and the day's chores are far from over, yet you have glimpsed the subtle humanity that flourishes beneath hierarchical constraints. Social life, small as it may seem, carries you forward, one joke, one shared task, one whispered secret at a time. It's a rhythm, a pulse that defies the Lord's dominance. A reminder that even in a world built on labor and obedience, resilience, creativity, and joy find their way through cracks in the strictures of medieval life. You trudge onward, aware that these small moments, often overlooked by outsiders, sustain not only your body but also the spirit of the village itself. Sunday arrives with the slow, measured tolling of the church bell, its deep resonance echoing across the patchwork of fields and clustered cottages. Even though your body screams for rest, aching muscles protesting every step, blisters throbbing on your palms, the ritual obligations of the week pull you toward the small, weathered stone church at the village center. You trudge along the muddy path, feeling the squelch of wet earth beneath your worn boots, noticing how the air carries a faint, lingering mixture of incense, smoke, and the earthy musk of damp wool. You wonder if the combination is meant to inspire awe or simply to mask the stubborn scent of years-old livestock. Historians still debate whether religious life offered genuine comfort to serfs or primarily reinforced social hierarchies, but your feet and aching back tell you that, in practice, both truths coexist simultaneously. Inside the church, the narrow nave is dimly lit by shafts of pale sunlight filtering through stained glass. Dust motes drift lazily in the colored beams, caught in the sway of candlelight that flickers from brass holders along the walls. The sermon begins, the priest's voice rising and falling like a tide, echoing across the stone floor. He expounds on the perils of sin, the blessings of obedience, and the moral imperative to respect the Lord's authority, his words punctuated by emphatic gestures and dramatic pauses. You shift uneasily, trying to ignore the ache in your knees, glancing at fellow villagers whose faces are a mosaic of devotion, fatigue, and mild irritation, a collective acknowledgement that listening is mandatory. Comprehension optional. Some fringe accounts suggest that certain priests claimed miraculous cures using the oddest ingredients, frogs, powdered roots, or bizarrely shaped animal parts, but historians still debate whether these tales were fact, embellishment, or clever tools for maintaining authority. Tithes are next, collected with ritual precision. You hand over a portion of whatever meager crop you manage to keep, feeling the familiar pinch of loss as coins or grains pass into the church's care. The priest counts carefully, nods approvingly, and the congregation silently acknowledges that refusal is unthinkable. And yet, in these rigid exchanges, small glimpses of humanity emerge. A neighbor leans over to whisper about the new priest's surprisingly bright robe, drawing a suppressed giggle from a child whose sneeze punctuates the quiet solemnity. Even the stiff, formal act of giving contains tiny threads of life and connection, a reminder that survival is not just physical, it's social, emotional, and quietly humorous. After the sermon, villagers linger outside, lingering in the warm sun as they discuss crop yields, minor domestic mishaps, and the week's small victories. There's a rhythm to these interactions, a heartbeat of communal resilience that binds people together against the harsher demands of the manor. You overhear whispered tales of priests who secretly blessed fields for better harvests, or performed minor miracles to cure headaches or stubborn rashes. Some acts may have been genuine, born of care and faith, others may have been clever superstition, designed to inspire belief or compliance. Either way, these stories add color, flavor, and texture to the otherwise gray, repetitive life you endure. Returning to your labor afterward, the influence of the church lingers subtly, like a warmth in your chest or a twinge of conscience at the back of your mind. You're more attuned to duties not just to the Lord but to God and the broader community. You also notice how superstition, rumor, and belief intertwine with morality, creating a complex web of incentives and cautions. Obedience is enforced both by human authority and the fear of divine retribution, yet moments of private amusement, whispered jokes, or mischievous pranks suggest that rebellion, tiny and inconspicuous, never entirely disappears. Your thoughts drift to one particularly fringe tale, a priest supposedly curing a persistent cough with a pinch of bat wing. Ridiculous, yes, yet oddly comforting. Even adults, it seems, cling to stories that make the harshness of life feel just a little less oppressive. As you trudge back toward the fields, boots sinking into the softened earth, you reflect on the dual nature of religion in the village. It is both structure and reprieve, a framework to understand the world, a social glue that unites neighbors, and a space for ritualized hope. Despite exhaustion, hunger, and the relentless demands of the Lord, Sundays offer a rare glimpse of rhythm, community, and small pleasures. You notice the way the sunlight glints off dew on the hedges, the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the churchyard, the faint scent of incense clinging to the hem of your tunic. Life, for a few fleeting hours, contains pockets of ritual, humor, and hope, even if those pockets are as fragile, fleeting, and necessary as the crust of bread you keep clutched in your hand. The seasons dictate your life more ruthlessly than the Lord ever could. Spring arrives with muddy fields that cling stubbornly to your boots, as if each clump of earth is a tether reminding you that work never ceases. Summer scorches your skin under a relentless sun, making you bend over wheat and barley in a haze of heat and sweat. Autumn dominates every waking hour with the urgency of harvest, a frenetic push to gather every stalk and kernel before frost or rot strikes. And winter brings a bone-deep cold that seeps through woolen tunics, layers of cloth, and even the cracks in your calloused skin, leaving you shivering in the smallest cottages, huddled near hearths that struggle to keep you warm. Some villagers swear that dancing in the fields, stomping in rhythm, or twirling under the sun could ward off frostbite, summon better weather, or even coax the earth into fertility, a curious, almost magical ritual that makes you pause and wonder whether superstition has more practical utility than science. Historians still debate whether these folk practices genuinely influenced agricultural outcomes or were purely symbolic gestures born of hope. But your own observations suggest that the rituals, at the very least, sustain morale. Spring planting is a slog of mud and muscle. You trudge through furrows that stretch endlessly across the tilled fields, feeling wet soil squish unpleasantly between your toes and cling to your worn boots. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, fresh grass, and the faint tang of manure, occasionally pierced by the distant bray of a donkey or the cawing of crows scavenging for stray seeds. Some villagers carry charms or ribbons to hang from tools, supposedly to ensure the seed takes root. Fringe accounts suggest that these charms sometimes include tiny carvings of animals, scraps of bone, or bits of cloth imbued with whispered blessings. You chuckle quietly at the thought, imagining future archaeologists unearthing them and puzzling over their purpose, unable to discern superstition from survival. Summer brings a relentless sun that beats down mercilessly, turning the fields into a shimmering sea of gold and heat. Every hour is measured in sweat and calloused hands as you bend over ripening wheat, gripping tools that were built for durability, not comfort. The glare makes your eyes water, and the labor blisters your palms. Still, the village hums with life. Children dive and splash in streams to cool off, women gossip and wash clothes in the sun, and men race to finish hay before evening dew soaks the bundles and makes them too heavy to transport. Even amid backbreaking work, the rhythm of the village is alive, a reminder that life continues, stubborn and resilient. Alongside your toil, autumn arrives with chaos and precision intertwined. The harvest is an unforgiving task, demanding swiftness and careful planning. One misstep could cost the Lord's wealth, or the loss of your modest allowance. You watch neighbors compete to finish rows of wheat or barley, sometimes joking, sometimes grimly determined, each stride a combination of labor, strategy, and pride. In the evenings, whispered stories circulate about those who failed last year's harvest, ending up in awkward or embarrassing situations, a reminder that social pressure complements physical labor. Quirky traditions emerge as well. Some villagers claim wearing specific colors during the harvest brings good fortune, while others insist singing certain tunes keeps the crops healthy. Whether superstition or simple excuses to wear nicer tunics, these rituals add a touch of humanity and levity to an otherwise punishing routine. Winter is both a punishment and a rare respite. Snow falls silently over cottages and fields, weighing down branches and rooftops. Cold bites through layers of wool, leather, and straw, making each movement deliberate and slow. Indoors, you huddle near the fire, trying to warm children's fingers while repairing tools for the coming spring. Some elders insist that dancing, singing, or rhythmic stomping wards off frostbite and disease, turning survival into a communal spectacle. Fringe accounts describe villagers leaving tiny offerings outside doors, a bowl of milk, a bundle of herbs, or a carved figurine, to appease spirits or ensure protection during the harsh months. Whether these practices were widespread or merely isolated gestures, the intent is clear: survival is as much about hope, ritual, and community as it is about strength. Through every season, the rhythm of work, ritual, and community ties you tightly to the land and your neighbors. You notice how subtly life adapts. Survival is never brute force alone. It's watching the sky, observing the wind, interpreting animal behaviors, learning folk remedies for minor ailments, participating in long-standing traditions, and occasionally indulging in whimsical dances that may, in some way, influence the frost. The cycle repeats relentlessly and predictably, yet within it lie fleeting beauties and small joys: the first green shoots of spring, the shimmering heat haze over the wheat, the laughter of children chasing each other through autumn leaves, the hush and sparkle of fresh snow blanketing the village in winter. These moments remind you that even in drudgery, in toil, and in a life dictated by necessity, there are textures, rhythms, and subtle wonders that make survival not just a struggle, but an intricate, lived experience. Your hands ache from the constant grip on wooden tools, raw skin rubbing against worn handles, yet every day demands mastery of implements that would seem crude, or even barbaric, by modern standards. The plow is heavy, awkwardly balanced, and sometimes tilts under your weight, threatening to snag in a stubborn furrow. The sickle, small yet deceptively sharp, requires precision. One slip could slice your fingers in an instant, and the spade, though simple in design, feels like an extension of your aching back as you force it into packed soil. Fringe accounts tell of serfs who supposedly attached charms to their tools: tiny bones, carved symbols, threads of string, or even scraps of colored cloth, believing these tokens could ensure better harvests or protect against bad luck. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or merely isolated anecdotes recorded because they seemed curious. You find yourself staring at your worn plow handle, imagining it as both a weapon in an emergency and a lifeline to survival, and realize that thriving here demands not just strength and endurance, but constant ingenuity, subtle experimentation, and careful observation. The techniques themselves are primitive but effective. You follow the Lord's instructions for crop rotation, though a quiet part of your mind wonders why no one has figured out the obvious inefficiency in forcing oats after barley, year after year. Each day consists of digging, slicing, and turning the soil with a rhythm that, despite blistered hands and relentless sunburn, feels almost meditative. Sweat drips into your eyes, the sun glinting off the rough soil as your muscles ache in predictable patterns, and you notice the subtle cues of fertile ground: a darker patch here, softer soil there, the faint smell of decomposed leaves hinting at richer nutrients. Historians still debate whether these methods truly maximized yield or merely maintained a rigid status quo designed to benefit the Lord, but you have little choice other than to follow them, blending compliance with quiet observation. Occasionally, whispers of experimental practices circulate through the cottages and fields. A neighbor once claimed to bury ashes with seeds, believing the alkaline residue would coax stronger growth. Or crush shells into the soil to improve texture. Some villagers performed small magical agricultural rituals, placing tiny offerings at planting, whispering charms at dawn, or observing phases of the moon, though whether these actions had any measurable effect is highly disputed. You chuckle at these stories, imagining the modern equivalent, tractors lined up under the moon for blessing ceremonies, fertilizer jars sprinkled with incantations. It's a world apart, yet there's charm in the belief that the soil, the tools, and the labor itself are imbued with intention and care. Repairing tools is another endless necessity. The metal blades of sickles dull quickly against dense stalks. Wooden handles splinter under repeated force, and every day demands improvisation and ingenuity. You notice subtle skills developing, balancing the plow just so to avoid toppling, sharpening a blade at a precise angle to slice cleanly without chipping, or fashioning makeshift harnesses for oxen that strain and pull with stubborn strength. Fringe sources even claim some serfs held informal competitions, seeing who could repair a tool fastest or craft the most efficient harness, blending practical skill with playful rivalry. You think about joining, though the combination of exhaustion and focus on survival usually wins. The monotony of labor is punctuated by small victories. A plow line that runs perfectly straight, a fence standing firm without wobbling, or a sickle slicing effortlessly through a thick row of stalks brings unexpected pride. These accomplishments may appear trivial, but they signal competence, control, and resilience in a life carefully designed to limit both. Every moment, bending, lifting, turning, wiping sweat from sunburned skin, feeling dirt under your fingernails, cements an intimate connection with the land. There's a rhythm to this repetition, a tactile and sensory feedback loop that roots you in the soil and in survival. The Lord may never notice these efforts, yet their presence shapes the world around you, influencing harvests, livestock, and the daily lives of neighbors who share the same struggle. And yet, despite the aching muscles and crude implements, there is a curious elegance to it all. You learn the quirks of the soil, how to read subtle patterns of moisture, shadow, and furrow. You coax reluctant earth into yielding, adjust angles, timing, and pressure with the experience of repeated observation. The line between labor and art begins to blur. You become a craftsman of survival, performing daily rituals with worn hands, crude tools, and an unyielding spark of ingenuity. Each day, sweat, dirt, and strain combine with knowledge, small victories, and adaptive creativity, transforming what seems like mere labor into a form of mastery over both the land and the limitations imposed upon you. In this repetitive, grueling, and deeply tactile world, survival is never passive. It is active, deliberate, and inventive, demanding constant negotiation between your own endurance, the temperament of the tools, the whims of nature, and the ever-present authority of the Lord. Mastery is quiet, cumulative, and invisible to those who do not participate, but to you, it is both lifeline and quiet triumph, shaping your identity as one who endures, adapts, and finds order in the rhythms of toil. Beyond the endless plowing, weeding, and tending of livestock, some serfs quietly carve out tiny niches of autonomy through crafts and side projects, subtle assertions of independence in a world designed to limit it. You watch neighbors weaving baskets, fashioning simple wooden spoons, or hammering nails into rough ironwork. Each action is deliberate, precise, and honed through repetitive practice. These skills are more than mere hobbies, they can be bartered for extra food. A handful of eggs, a candle for the hearth, or even a rare few moments of leisure stolen from the day's obligations. Historians still debate how widespread these side talents truly were among the peasantry, but observation in the village suggests that the most inventive serfs often command quiet influence, a subtle authority that exists almost invisibly alongside the Lord's overarching power. you remember an old woman in the village who secretly taught her daughter to spin wool into fine threads. The spindle whirs softly in her calloused hands as the daughter carefully draws out fibers, twisting them into yarn that could be fashioned into simple garments or sold at a nearby market. They would sometimes sneak their rudimentary textiles past the Lord's watchful eyes, carrying the spun cloth in baskets beneath layers of hay or laundry. Fringe tales even suggest that some serfs experimented with tiny cosmetic concoctions or herbal remedies, transforming common plants into lotions, balms, or fragrant infusions. Whether this was widespread or merely romanticized anecdote is unclear, but the idea sparks your imagination. Survival here isn't solely about brute labor, it's about cleverness, ingenuity, and the quiet assertion of human desire beyond mere existence. Bartering becomes a vital and delicate skill, a currency of creativity and effort. A well-crafted basket or a few yards of hand-spun cloth can be exchanged for extra bread, a handful of dried beans, or the rare luxury of a candle to brighten a winter evening. You notice the subtle hierarchies emerging. Those with skills, especially practical or ornamental talents, quietly command respect and influence within the village, while those lacking them remain at the mercy of seasonal fortune and the Lord's capricious whims. Some historians argue that this informal economy provided psychological sustenance as well as physical. Small gestures of trade and skill offered serfs a sense of control. A semblance of agency in an otherwise rigid and externally dictated life. Even minor talents carry social cachet. A neighbor capable of mending worn shoes, fashioning a sturdy plow handle, or carving a crude wooden toy earns quiet admiration, while those who fail may endure gentle mockery, another incentive to maintain skill and attention. Fringe stories suggest some serfs staged miniature competitions, demonstrating craft abilities under hushed observation, sometimes accompanied by hidden wagers of food, coins, or favors. You can't help but smile at the notion of these secret contests, miniature Olympics of survival, ingenuity, and quiet defiance, all unfolding beneath the Lord's inattentive gaze. These crafts also foster moments of genuine creativity. You watch a young boy carve a small wooden whistle, marveling at the tiny, pure sounds it produces, each note an echo of curiosity and delight. Nearby, a woman knits an intricate pattern into a rough cloth bag, focused more on the satisfaction of the process than on any utility of the finished object. In a life dominated by toil, these small artistic gestures feel revolutionary, a subtle rebellion against the monotony imposed by circumstance, proof that even in constraint, ingenuity can flourish. And yet, every triumph is tempered by risk. The Lord's whims can intervene at any moment. He may demand extra labor for a festival, confiscate goods deemed unnecessary, or impose arbitrary fines to reinforce authority. You quickly learn that cleverness has boundaries, and that every act of creation must be balanced with caution and awareness. Still, the very act of crafting, weaving, carving, or trading beyond immediate survival becomes an assertion of identity, a silent insistence that you are more than labor, more than fodder for the manor's needs. Through these small victories, serfs cultivate a quiet autonomy, carving fragments of freedom and dignity from a life otherwise dictated by others. In these fleeting triumphs, the endless days of work, hardship, and obedience become slightly more bearable, each project a testament to endurance, skill, and the unyielding desire to leave a mark upon the world. However small, family life threads itself through your daily labor, weaving together survival, affection, obligation, and quiet ingenuity into a rhythm that never truly pauses. Children start working almost as soon as they can walk, learning to carry small bundles of firewood without spilling, scattering seed in carefully measured rows, or helping tend animals with tentative, eager hands. You notice a 5-year-old carefully balancing a basket of herbs, eyes intent, fingers trembling as if the smallest misstep could undo hours of preparation. In that moment, you're reminded that childhood here is a brief, fragile luxury, often traded for the demands of survival. Fringe stories persist of clever children who manage to outwit overseers with small pranks, hiding extra eggs, swapping tools, or feigning distraction, but whether these anecdotes are exaggerated or based in reality remains a matter of debate among scholars. Still, you sense the kernel of truth in them. Ingenuity begins early when life leaves no room for idleness. Raising children amidst backbreaking work demands both discipline and creativity. You find yourself teaching them practical skills while simultaneously embedding lessons about the village's hidden rules, which plants are safe to eat, how to anticipate the Lord's scrutiny, and where to discover fleeting moments of joy. Survival education blends seamlessly with domestic routine, where laughter sneaks between chores and whispered instructions accompany every scrape, lift, and bend. Historians still debate whether these teachings were systematic or highly variable, dependent on family circumstance, temperament, and the mood of the day, but observation makes clear that both realities coexist. Some children display precocious understanding, learning tricks of trade and observation with remarkable acuity, while others simply absorb the rhythm of toil, gradually internalizing the world around them. Family meals are brief and functional, a pause dictated not by desire but by necessity. Everyone eats quickly, passing around scraps of bread, watered-down pottage, and occasional pieces of salted cheese. Older children assist the younger ones, carefully balancing bowls or wiping dripping hands, teaching them subtle coordination alongside sustenance. Even amid scarcity, parents strive to impart comfort, a pinch of herbs added to the pottage, a fleeting joke about a stubborn cow, or a whispered story about some inconsequential mischief from the morning. Quirky tales circulate of families surreptitiously acquiring small treats from the Lord's surplus, or of children fashioning toys from scraps of wood, cloth, or discarded ribbons. These acts are minor rebellions in miniature, reminders that creativity and joy can flourish even under constraint. The balance between labor and care is delicate, almost choreographed. Infants and toddlers must be kept close to the hearth or cradles to avoid injury or exposure, while older siblings manage their own tasks, creating a fluid rhythm of protection, instruction, and contribution. You notice how neighbors help each other seamlessly. One family lends a child to watch over a sibling, another signals quietly if an overseer approaches. Together, they weave a subtle network of support, a tapestry of communal vigilance and shared effort. Historians debate whether this system was deliberate cooperation or a necessity born from exhaustion and pragmatic adaptation, yet its effectiveness is undeniable. Without it, survival would be far more tenuous. Through all this, you catch fleeting, tender moments that anchor you amid the relentless grind, the warmth of a small hand slipping into yours, a shared smile over a minor victory in the field, or the quiet satisfaction of teaching someone a skill that may ease their burden tomorrow. Even amid constant labor, scarcity, and fatigue, these glimpses of connection provide sustenance of a different sort, emotional fuel that threads through the long hours of toil. In these ephemeral interactions, the fabric of family life asserts itself, resilient and intimate, intertwining human ingenuity, care, and endurance. The village may demand obedience, the Lord may enforce labor, and the fields may never rest, but within the chaotic, exhausting, and occasionally joyous rhythm of family, you find both an anchor and a quiet rebellion, a proof that humanity persists, even when every day feels dictated by survival. Disease is a constant, invisible companion, lurking in the water, the food, and even the bedding. Smallpox, dysentery, and lice infest your days, reminding you that survival is as much about avoiding illness as completing the Lord's endless demands. You scratch at an itch that's become routine, grimacing at the possibility that it might be a symptom rather than annoyance. Fringe remedies circulate through the village, some as bizarre as applying crocodile dung to rashes, others involving poultices made from herbs and tree bark. Historians still argue whether such methods had any real efficacy, or if they were more about providing a sense of control. You watch a neighbor treating her child with a concoction of crushed roots and warm water, whispering incantations as she does. The child squeals, partly from discomfort and partly from amusement, while the surrounding villagers glance on with a mix of skepticism and hope. You realize that in a world without hospitals, the boundary between superstition and practical medicine is incredibly thin, and sometimes sheer belief can feel like half the cure. Sanitation is minimal. Waste disposal occurs in open pits or the edges of fields, ensuring that disease spreads faster than gossip. You notice how quickly illnesses move through the village, and how parents and elders develop patterns of care that, while crude, manage to mitigate complete catastrophe. Some fringe accounts suggest that certain herbs were deliberately planted near homes to repel sickness, or perhaps the odors simply distracted from worse smells, but the practice reflects a sophisticated, if rudimentary, understanding of environmental health. You also note the psychological impact of disease. Fear is constant, one cough can spark rumors of plague. And the smallest rash may incite whispered warnings. Yet amidst anxiety, humor persists. Villagers tell stories about magical cures, absurd rituals, and even animals with supposed healing powers, often laughing quietly to keep spirits high. Historians still debate how much such humor contributed to communal resilience, but in practice, it provides a necessary distraction from the ever-present threat of illness. Despite these dangers, life continues. You labor, eat, and care for family while keeping an eye on symptoms, both for yourself and others. The intertwining of superstition, practical remedies, and sheer luck creates a fragile balance. Every day survived feels like a minor victory. Every child who grows past infancy, every adult who endures a harsh winter, reinforces the idea that resilience in this world isn't just physical, it's social, psychological, and even a little magical. Festivals and fairs punctuate the relentless rhythm of work, offering brief relief and a taste of joy that seems almost illicit. You trudge into the village square, mud squelching beneath your boots, and notice the decorations, ribbons flapping in the wind, simple garlands of flowers, and perhaps the occasional painted pumpkin if it's harvest season. For a few hours, the monotony of toil dissolves into a swirl of music, laughter, and games. Some fringe accounts claim that villagers staged bizarre competitions, like balancing a hog on a pole or racing in sacks of grain, though historians still argue how widespread such rituals were versus exaggerated anecdote. The smell of roasted meats and sweet pastries, rare luxuries, wafts through the air. You nibble at a small treat, careful not to draw the Lord's attention, and savor the contrast to your usual pottage. Children chase each other around the central well, shrieking with delight, while adults exchange gossip, news, and playful insults. These moments, brief though they are, forge community bonds that endure long after the fair ends. Games and contests are often peculiar. You watch as villagers attempt to vault over barrels or toss small objects at targets, cheering and groaning at every success or failure. Fringe tales suggest that some competitions even involved mildly absurd magical rituals, like tossing a coin over one's shoulder to ensure victory, but whether anyone truly believed in their efficacy is debatable. The humor is real, at least, and it's enough to keep spirits afloat. Feasts bring another layer of social interaction. You sit with neighbors, sharing what little you've managed to acquire, noticing how hierarchy temporarily softens. The Lord might still be present, observing the spectacle, but for a few hours, the village operates on its own rhythms. Jokes, storytelling, and shared joy outweigh duty and fear. Historians still argue whether these gatherings genuinely improved morale or merely distracted serfs from their ongoing hardships, but from where you sit, both explanations feel plausible. As dusk approaches, the festival winds down. You feel a subtle warmth from camaraderie and laughter, a temporary shield against the relentless toil of the following day. Quirks, jokes, and traditions, hog-on-a-pole competitions included, linger in your memory, small proof that even in a life defined by labor and obligation, humans carve out moments of celebration, absurdity, and fleeting delight. Punishments are never far from your mind. One wrong step, a missed task, a broken tool, or an unintentional slight toward the Lord, and consequences arrive swiftly, sometimes in the form of public humiliation, fines, or additional labor. Fringe stories abound. Villagers speak of trial by ordeal contests where accused offenders faced ridiculous challenges, like standing barefoot in icy streams or balancing a sack of grain on their heads, though historians still debate whether these were real practices or exaggerated morality tales. You try not to imagine yourself in such scenarios, focusing instead on keeping your posture perfect and your work pace steady. The overseer patrols the fields with a watchful eye, ready to correct, chastise, or ridicule. A minor mistake can become a spectacle. A missed line of plowing might warrant scolding, while a more serious oversight could inspire neighbors' whispers for weeks. You notice how people develop strategies to avoid infractions, small tricks, subtle timing, or clever misdirection. Some fringe accounts claim that serfs once staged accidental mishaps to appease the Lord's desire for entertainment, blurring the line between punishment and performative obedience. Justice here is both arbitrary and visible. The Lord sets the rules, yet allows a spectrum of flexibility, often depending on whim or mood. You witness neighbors paying fines in grain or labor, sometimes over offenses that feel trivial or nonsensical. The system reinforces obedience while offering tiny loopholes for those perceptive enough to exploit them. Historians argue whether this created genuine compliance or encouraged subtle forms of resistance, and from your perspective, both seem accurate. Despite the threat, humor often survives. Villagers whisper jokes about the most absurd punishments, quietly mocking authority while performing their tasks. You find it helps keep morale afloat. A shared grin at a ridiculous story, like the neighbor forced to polish boots with pond water, becomes a tiny act of defiance. These narratives circulate alongside warnings, reminding everyone to stay alert while maintaining a flicker of communal levity. By evening, the weight of potential punishment shapes behavior almost as much as hunger or cold. You are keenly aware that survival isn't just a matter of skill or endurance, it's navigating a web of expectations, fear, and opportunity. And yet, within this rigid system, you glimpse creativity and subtle rebellion, the clever adaptations that allow humans to endure, maintain dignity, and even find humor amidst rigid hierarchies and relentless labor. The thought of escape drifts through your mind like a forbidden cloud. Sometimes you imagine slipping past the manor's boundaries under the cover of night, fleeing to the woods or neighboring towns where serfdom holds less sway. Fringe stories circulate of serfs who successfully ran away, hiding from patrols, surviving on wild plants, and even forging secret identities, but historians still debate how often such escapes actually succeeded versus ending in capture or punishment. You glance at the horizon, imagining yourself slipping past hedges, your heart racing, and then shake your head, knowing the odds are grim. Rebellion, too, simmers quietly. Villagers occasionally resist collectively, perhaps slowing work intentionally, hiding tools, or quietly sabotaging crops destined for the Lord. Some tales speak of small uprisings, marches, or mock protests, though evidence is sparse and historians dispute their scale and frequency. You consider how easy it would be to join, to throw down a spade and refuse orders, but the price of failure is harsh, and survival instincts outweigh desire for immediate rebellion. Even within this controlled existence, tiny acts of defiance provide relief. You notice neighbors trading extra food, sneaking herbs into pottage, or telling exaggerated stories to distract overseers. These small rebellions are like breathing windows, moments where the system's grip loosens just enough to allow a glimmer of freedom. Fringe anecdotes tell of villagers staging clever diversions, cats accidentally released near the Lord's livestock, or barrels tipped to slow work, but whether these pranks truly happened or evolved as folklore remains uncertain. Planning escape or revolt requires subtlety. You observe routines, watch patrol schedules, and mentally note which hedges or riverbanks might conceal a hasty flight. Even these thoughts, quiet and fleeting, bring a strange sense of agency. The possibility, however remote, of controlling your destiny, even momentarily, injects small bursts of hope into otherwise monotonous days. Historians argue whether serfs' imaginations of freedom provided real psychological relief or merely fantasies, but you feel both, a mix of desire and strategy coursing through your mind. As night falls, you tuck these thoughts away, recognizing that survival depends on blending obedience with subtle cunning. Dreams of escape linger at the edges of consciousness, not as immediate solutions but as mental oxygen, proof that even in a world designed to suppress choice, your mind remains free to wander, plan, and resist, quietly, cleverly, and and sometimes, mischievously, twilight descends like a soft curtain over the manor, and you collapse onto the rough-hewn bench outside your cottage. Limbs heavy and joints screaming from the day's labor. The sky deepens to a bruised purple, stars pricking through the fading light. You exhale, letting the rhythm of evening lull your mind, though your body still buzzes with residual tension. Fringe tales speak of secret nighttime rituals, villagers whispering charms over crops, children leaving small offerings for unseen spirits, or even elders reciting prayers meant to shield the family from misfortune. Historians still debate how prevalent such practices truly were, but the idea lends a mystical shimmer to the otherwise stark routine. Your neighbors also begin the slow process of winding down. Women stir fires, preparing watery stew while keeping a watchful eye on children who dart between cottages, refusing to settle. Men clean tools, patch clothing, or quietly repair fences under dim lantern light. You notice how small acts, mending, cooking, arranging possessions, become meditative, a way to reclaim a fraction of control in a life otherwise dictated by labor, the Lord, and the seasons. Children, despite exhaustion, find fleeting joy in the shadows. A whispered game, a shared story, a quiet contest over who can make the best shadow puppet with a lantern's glow, these moments feel sacred, stolen from the relentless demands of the day. Fringe accounts even claim that some children would hide small trinkets or charms near the hearth, believing in their protective power, whether real or symbolic. The act fosters hope and imagination. As darkness deepens, you reflect on your place in this intricate web: serf, laborer, sibling, apprentice, minor rebel, storyteller. Despite fatigue and hunger, there's a subtle satisfaction in endurance, in maintaining connection to both land and community. The trials of the day, once overwhelming, now feel like part of a larger rhythm. A cadence you've learned to navigate. Historians still argue how mentally resilient serfs truly were, but as you watch smoke curl from chimneys and hear distant laughter or lullabies, you feel that resilience in the marrow of your bones. Night fully settles, and the manor quiets. Shadows stretch, wind rustles through bare branches, and the world feels vast yet intimate. You clutch your small comforts, family, the shared knowledge of survival, fleeting moments of joy, holding them close as sleep begins its slow descent. Tonight, the world is both cruel and strangely tender, a reminder that even amidst hardship, life endures, adapts, and occasionally offers a spark of wonder. Dawn creeps quietly over the manor, painting the sky with pale pink and gold, and you awaken with aching limbs yet familiar resolve. Another day stretches ahead, almost indistinguishable from countless others, yet somehow imbued with the quiet poetry of survival. You trudge across frost-dusted fields, boots crunching, and notice the subtle glimmer of dew on wheat, the way sunlight strikes the church spire, and the soft murmur of villagers beginning their routines. Fringe accounts mention that some serfs marked the first light of day with whispered blessings to ensure productivity or avoid accidents, though historians still debate the prevalence and seriousness of these rituals. The rhythm of labor resumes seamlessly, plowing, weeding, repairing, hauling, punctuated by occasional laughter, whispered gossip, or a child's shrill cry. You are painfully aware of the Lord's demands yet comforted by the faint sense of community that binds the village together. Even the most mundane actions, straightening a fence post, tying a bundle of hay, carry a small, personal pride, a quiet reminder that your existence, while constrained, matters. Social bonds continue to shape your day. Neighbors exchange tips on crop care, share surplus food, and offer advice on tool maintenance. Children sneak in playful antics between chores, and elders pass along stories, folk remedies, or tiny lessons about surviving winters, harvests, and illness. These networks of knowledge and support, though informal, form a lifeline. Historians debate whether such networks were conscious strategies for resilience or simply the natural result of close living conditions, but you feel their benefits firsthand. The specter of illness, punishment, and scarcity hovers, yet humor and ingenuity punctuate the routine. Villagers slip small pranks past the overseers, hide extras from the Lord, or tell exaggerated tales of previous misfortunes. Fringe stories even suggest secret night gatherings where minor rebellions or playful competitions occurred, though their scale is uncertain. These acts, small as they may be, carve out agency in a system designed to limit it. By late afternoon, you pause briefly, looking over the fields, cottages, and distant woods. The world seems both oppressive and miraculous, a delicate balance of endurance, wit, and community. Each day repeats, yet each day also holds tiny sparks of hope, ingenuity, and fleeting joy, proof that even in a life bound by obligation, human spirit endures. You trudge forward, tired but resilient, and recognize that survival is not merely physical, it is creative, social, and stubbornly, beautifully human. As night settles over the manor once more, you feel the slow easing of tension in your shoulders, the gentle release of fatigue through your limbs. The air is softer now, carrying the faint sense of damp earth, hay, and wood smoke, wrapping the village in a quiet intimacy. You let your eyes drift across the cottages, noticing the tiny flickers of candlelight in windows, the faint outlines of trees swaying in a cool breeze, and the muted chorus of crickets and distant livestock. Life, relentless and demanding during the day, now seems to exhale alongside you, offering a gentle lull after hours of effort and perseverance. Your mind wanders to the rhythms you followed, planting, plowing, repairing, laughing, learning, surviving, and to the subtle victories that persist beneath the weight of labor, a straight plow line, a repaired fence, a shared joke, or a small act of kindness. Even the mundane becomes comforting when framed as part of a steady, enduring cycle, each day folding into the next like gentle waves. The struggles, the fatigue, and the occasional fear are still there, of course, but tonight they soften, becoming contours rather than obstacles, shadows that give shape to the warmth and light of your little world. You breathe slowly, letting the sounds of night mingle with memories of fleeting laughter, whispered stories, and quiet moments of ingenuity. Even in hardship, the village thrives, not just through toil, but through connection, cleverness, and tiny sparks of joy that remind you why enduring matters. Each heartbeat, each movement, and each shared glance is a testament to the resilience of life, a quiet proof that human spirit persists even in the most constrained circumstances. Finally, your eyes grow heavy, the weight of both body and mind merging into a soothing surrender. You feel the pulse of the land, the rhythm of seasons, and the gentle tether of community cradle you, carrying you into sleep. Tonight, the fields rest, the animals slumber, the cottages are silent, and you, too, are invited into that calm, restorative pause. Let the breath of history, the cadence of labor, and the whispers of tiny rebellions lull you gently, carrying you toward dreams that weave endurance with imagination, and hardship with warmth.